Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we have a standalone episode on a film released this weekend in 1984, Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Now bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, co-author of California Tiki, coming this August from the History Press. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth Studios, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. Also in Austin is Mr. Drew Edwards, creator of the long-running indie comic Halloween Man, and coming July 4th from Comixology and Sugar Skull Media, the new Lucy Chaplin, Science Starlet. I love that name. I love it. Special. Drew, say hello.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. You're all doomed.
It's got a death curse. All right. Also in Austin, president of Girls Rock Austin and lead singer and upright bassist of the internationally acclaimed all-female rock and roll band Danger Cakes, whose newest release, Gloomy Girl, is available now. Say hello, Jamie Barr.
Hello, Jamie Barr.
Hello. Oh my gosh. It's
picking up the slack.
Picking up the slack.
Awesome.
Yes. Welcome. It's great to have you back. I can report that Joya was like, I am not watching that movie. That's just
Well, I felt, I took her place on the last Oscar-worthy movie. Oh, Oscar-winning movie we did, The Shape of Water. But I don't know about this one. I don't know if this one is critically acclaimed. I'm sure it has the full endorsement of a film critic by the name of Mr. Drew Edwards, though.
Yeah, indeed. It is acclaimed. It's acclaimed. Many people feel this to be the finest of the Friday the 13th movies, and I think that's worth just discussing. Okay, Friday the 13th, the final chapter, is a 1984 American slasher film directed by Joseph Zito. It is the fourth installment of the Friday the 13th films. Following the events of Friday the 13th Part 3, Jason Voorhees returns to Crystal Lake and continues his killing spree on a family and a group of neighboring teenagers after being revived from his own mortal wounds. It stars Corey Feldman, Ted White, Kimberly Beck, and the one and only Crispin Glover. It was filmed from October 1983 to January 1984. So you're looking at the late fall and the winter in Topanga Canyon, California, and then it had to be rushed through post to make its April release date. This film grossed $33 million in the U.S., though the king of all critics, Roger Ebert, called it an immoral and reprehensible piece of trash. And it was followed a year. Yeah. And it was followed a year later by Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. So it was not the final chapter for very long. Not after grossing, because it costs like $2 million and it made 33. And so we're like, eat it, Roger. We're coming out with another one. So this one is a personal choice of Mr. Drew Edwards. So we'll go Drew, Jamie, Tony, and then if I have anything to say, I will. Drew, why are we watching Friday the 13th, the final chapter?
Well, for one, as you mentioned briefly already, this is the 35th anniversary of Friday the 13th, the final chapter, which makes me feel every bit as ancient as that sounds. 'Cause I remember when this movie was brand new. I love this movie. This is probably my second favorite Friday the 13th movie. We already did my favorite, which is Jason Lives. But this is a very, very close second. I think this is a very atmospheric and frightening entry into the Friday the 13th series. I love the rain, and Ted White makes an incredibly menacing Jason. A lot of fans think that he's actually the scariest Jason in the entire franchise. And of course, when you're coming down to like an 80s cast, this movie has Corey Feldman and Crispin Glover. I mean, how can you top that? And some amazing, amazing gore effects from the Wizard of Gore himself, Mr. Tom Savini. This movie really has it all. It is high 1980s horror at its finest, and I will gush all over this movie for the entire podcast if you let me. And I would like to get into some of the interesting trivia facts, so I won't keep going on. I will just let everybody else get into it. But I really do. This movie hits a lot of the warm, fuzzy nostalgia buttons. And honestly, after the a little too real world horror of Frenzy, I think getting back into the sort of EC Comics flavored world of Friday the 13th was a nice repass. So I'm sure everybody else will have their own thoughts, but those are mine.
Love it. Okay, Jamie. So I'm dying to. Is this your first time watching the final chapter? And what are your thoughts?
I've seen this one before, actually. I actually saw this one back when I was a kid. And I always kind of, I don't know, I'm trying to think the one that I saw first. And, you know, Jason, you kind of feel bad for. He's this kid who, like, there's some gross negligence on these counselors' parts, you know, for this kid who obviously has some special needs. And I always, like, sided with Jason. And I felt bad, even with, like, his mom going around killing people. I still felt bad.
Sure.
Like, I was like, oh, shouldn't be really siding with that side, but I did. Like, I felt bad for them. But this time around, I'm like, you're just bloodthirsty, and it kind of bothers me that there's no rhyme or reason for it. Like, that, you know, now it's just any person. It's not even just any teenager who's, you know, smoking or drinking and having sex. It's, you know, basically anybody who just happens to be in Jason's path. Like, literally, like that hitchhiker who's just sitting there eating a banana. Like,
that's the right word.
you know,
Somebody who's just in his path, and he's just gonna, yeah.
So that bothered me in this one. I didn't like that aspect of it, because I'd like to think, with, you know, out of all the, you know, bad monsters, I don't know, maybe there's a part of me that thinks that I could talk Jason down if I were in like that, but I'd be right up there with him. I like all of those things.
Sure.
You'd be like, no,
there isn't actually a rationale that you might be able to talk him down, and I will get into that later.
Yeah.
Well,
somebody always
couldn't
comes
that
up
be
with
like,
that idea.
I could say something like, Mother says, Jace, like, stand down, Jason, or whatever. But I guess I don't look enough like his mom. And I don't know. I have some really long locks that are quite luxurious. It would take me some time before I could shave my head like Corey Feldman in a matter of, like, I don't know, 2.5 minutes while his sister's being, like, attacked.
Yeah.
So, you know, because that would be my first ration. Well, you know, like, first thing you do when somebody's in your house trying to murder your family.
Oh yeah, no, we'll get to like how exactly he hits on that idea.
But so I mean, there's some weird things about this movie, but it does have a Corey, you know, so that definitely gives it a boost in my book. Corey Feldman, I'm like, all right, young Corey Feldman, and you know, there's just some of the gore is, you know, it's, I have to say, like, watching some of the behind the scenes things, I was like, all right, how did they do this? Is it the way I thought? I'm like, yes, it is. Some of it, no, but other things I was kind of spot on. I was proud of myself. So, but it's very interesting. So
I'd love to know how they do some of these, and maybe Drew will know when we get there. Tony, Friday 13th Part 4.
I think 3 is my favorite. I hadn't seen this one in a long time. I am probably in the middle on this. Definitely, you know, I don't love it as much as Drew. I think that if anybody is gonna, this is peak 80s. Like, if you're gonna make a movie where you talk about horror movie trope, this has all of it, for warts and all. Like, all of the reactionary movies that are like, oh, the killer always does X, Y, or Z. I think this is basically the template for any postmodern take on any of that. And, you know, that's good and bad, right? Like, obviously they were trying to end it, or at least it seems like it, or, you know, go into a different direction at least with how everything ends up. I don't know. It's a good Friday the 13th movie. I don't know how often I'd watch it. I don't think it's ever been my favorite. So yeah.
All right. So my feeling about this one actually is that, to me, and I have not seen all of the Friday the 13th movies. I'm sorry to say that. Or if I have, I've completely forgotten at least a couple of them there in the middle. But I believe, you know, that we all have an idea that is very similar to what is described by the campfire teller at the beginning of this movie, of what these movies are about. That so in the perfect world of forms, in the Campfire Tale version of a Friday the 13th movie, there's the masked killer chasing people. There's lots of stuff in the woods, and I think this is a cool movie. I mean, I'm always going to be happier when we're doing stuff like The Changeling or whatever, when we can just sort of all get off on the strange frisson that such movies create. But this, I feel like this is a near perfect manifestation of what a Jason Voorhees stalking people movie would be like. So I found myself really pleased with this.
I'm
So
with you there overall.
I'm sorry?
I said I'm with you there overall.
Yeah.
It is exactly, you're not getting anything other than what you're getting.
Right.
Worse than all.
Well, the place I'd like to start actually is with the big question, the one that comes from what Roger Ebert had to say about this movie. And to recap, just like the 20-second version of what's going on in this movie picks up at the end of Friday the 13th Part 3, and in the end, it has Jason coming back to Crystal Lake and stalking a set of characters, and involves a family that lives there and a bunch of variably horny teenagers, including Crispin Glover. And what I wanted to talk about straight up at the top, before we get into individual parts of the film, is Roger Ebert got really upset. He was on Siskel and Ebert, which is a very popular show at the time. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert have both died at this point, but in 1984 they were still like the top. And Ebert said that this was immoral, reprehensible trash. And the reason he felt that was basically it came down to, if I can understand him, it was that the movie had a moral, and the moral was that life sucks and bad things will happen for random reasons, and that further that was an incorrect message to send. And that it was doing the culture a disservice to watch movies like this. And I got to say, by the way, Gene Siskel immediately goes, "No, Roger, you're full of shit. This is just a roller coaster ride. Teenagers like to see other teenagers get killed." I mean, Drew, I know you. You're a very kind person. Tony, you're an extraordinarily kind person. Jamie, you're a sweet person. What do you think about that? I mean, is this an immoral and reprehensible piece of trash? I mean, or setting aside, what do we make of that critique of this film?
I am far more troubled by the violence and frenzy than I am, which is very brief, I guess, if you're going to compare it minutes, than I am at anything in this, because it's a difference in tone. The violence in the Friday the 13th movies it's Grand Guignol, it's EC Comics, it's over the top, it's cartoonish. It's not, I think tone always has to be taken into account. And when you're watching a film where someone asks, "Hey, where's the corkscrew?" and seconds later gets a corkscrew jammed into his hand.
Yeah.
That's gallows humor. It's not, to me, exactly fair to say that these movies have no value to them, because that's disregarding the sort of imagination that went into them, particularly the gore effects. Because, I mean, let's face it, Tom Savini is a genius of this kind of stuff. But to put it in the context of its time, and I talked about it a little bit the last time we did a Jason movie, these movies were, it's kind of funny because they're now kind of looked back as sort of quaint pieces of 80s pop culture. Mm-hmm. But these movies were thought of as evil back in the 80s. There was like a quasi-conspiracy theory I remember being discussed at my church the Sunday before one of these came out, about how the people who made these movies were part of a devil cult, and when they finally made 13 of them, the apocalypse would start. That's how people thought about Friday the 13th in the 80s. It kind of fell into all that. So, I mean, Roger Ebert certainly wasn't alone in thinking these things about these movies. And I mean, the problem with that is when like a stuffy old film critic says that, and you're a kid and it's the 1980s, you just want to see this movie that much more, because like I said, it becomes punk rock.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think about the tonality of the whole film itself. And it is dark. It is, like I said, you know everyone's doomed. It's not that everybody dies. I mean,
Yeah.
'cause they don't. But even at the very end, after, like, Corey Feldman goes apeshit on Jason's corpse and hacks him up into little pieces, or tries to, or whatnot, they show him at the hospital with his sister, who's got to have
Yeah.
surgery because she probably has, like, massive spinal fractures
Sure.
after
And
falling out
tendon
of
damage and all
yeah.
this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and God knows, like, what happened to mom. Like, they haven't even found their mom. Like, she gets basically killed on camera.
There's a deleted scene with the mom, but
Is there?
yeah, the mom was actually they were going to discover the mom's body drowned in the bathtub.
Oh, I see.
But it was cut from the movie because they thought in part for time and to keep it more. They thought it was scarier if it was ambiguous. But
if it ain't on the stage, then we could bring her back in another movie if we wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah, but I interrupted Jamie, and I apologize.
Oh, I'm just saying but the fact that, like I said, everybody is doomed, and that's hard to watch. That's when people see that, like, no matter, you can have everybody die, but one person, and it's still like, oh, okay, they survived. This one, even though there's still the survivor, it doesn't seem right. Like, it seems weird, and that, like, that it's not the end, even though Corey's, like, hacked him up into little pieces. There's just it's a darker tone, and I don't know. I could see where people would get a little bit more concerned about that, but does show, like, basically, like, teenagers just kind of, and I say teenagers, but these are people who are probably young 20-somethings, really.
Yes.
Not so teenagers, because they're, on their own and renting a house for, I don't know if it's for the summer or whatnot, but, they're just people living their life. It's not, they're not the same people. It's not Camp Crystal Lake in the first place. So it just, it can be dark. It's hard to sometimes think about that, but it's, again, you have to suspend your belief. It's fiction. It's not real. So,
I mean, I've always felt that young people seeing other young people get killed doesn't work the way that older people seeing young people get killed works. When I'm a teenager or a 20-something and I see a thing about some horny college kids who go out to the woods and get killed, it's thrilling because it's like kind of living through, a sort of gross out version of your own death, and it's a gag. There's no notion of, like, grieving, and there's, all that stuff is glossed over. It's harder for an adult to watch a movie where a bunch of teenagers get killed, because instead those people trigger feelings of you needing to protect them and stuff. So in a way, these movies either ask us as adults to put ourselves in the mindset of those younger people who understand the film differently than we do, or they are much harder for us to watch than they are for young people. And I think that was Roger Ebert's problem, which is that he felt like he was watching a Holocaust. I mean, he really seemed to have been deeply troubled by the film, which was strange considering how silly this film is.
And I don't know if that actually has to do with age either, honestly, Jason. I think that has to do with life experience versus age, because I think you're coming from it seeing these teenagers as, like, people who are closer to your kid's age than to your age.
Oh, and for sure. No doubt about it. No doubt about it.
You're seeing this, and, like, you're talking about grieving. Like, I remember, like, when I saw the mom, that's, like, the idea that the mother was killed really bothered me.
Yeah.
And, like I said, the people who had nothing to do with, like, those types of things really got to me in this one. And seeing some of the also extreme, like, death footage, like, some of it grossed me out. Some of it just, I kind of was like, that's all right, okay. I can see how that happened. Like the part where the boyfriend gets his head, like, crushed in and then falls into the the glass in the shower, that really bothered me. I was like, oh gosh, I couldn't
It does. It
watch
is
that.
pretty. It's pretty rough. But I was never emotional. I'm not trying to give away the ball game, but I was never
No, no,
emotionally
no.
disturbed by this movie
Well,
because I thought, unlike I think Drew said it well, Frenzy is disturbing.
oh yeah, I
This
watched Frenzy
movie.
with and I was glad that I didn't have to be on the podcast because I was so bothered by it.
Well,
Where
the
this
thing
one,
is different.
Go ahead,
what?
Drew.
Sorry. If I may, the difference between between this and a film like Frenzy is these characters. When you go into a movie like a Friday the 13th movie, these characters were created on the page
Yes.
to die.
Tonight.
Like they are not. You never get the emotional investment. Like you might enjoy some of them more than the others, like because of like silly things like the sort of greaser kid saying dead fuck and acting like a goofball when he's stoned, but you know what the score is. And
Yeah.
for whatever reason, I think when some people go into these movies, they do, Jamie hit on a really good point, is like people bring in their own expectation.
Yeah.
And I feel like for one, there's the illusion that sometimes when I talk to people and I say, oh, I really like Friday the 13th movies, and they're like, well, how can you feel that way? You consider yourself a feminist.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's this idea that Jason only massacres young naked girls. There's actually more men killed in this movie than women.
Yes.
That's people will bring, their own idea, their own life experience into this. But I think in some ways that's appropriate because my interpretation of these movies and the reason why they kind of, even though they're all kind of the same, they're also all kind of different, is that they really are campfire stories. They're a ghost story that you get told, and the shape kind of changes, with each different telling. But also, when you're being told a scary story, you are filling in the blanks in your head with your own life experience.
That's why the continuity is not particularly important. That's why there's a character in this film, for instance, who is an expert on Jason, who has brought clippings about Jason that are old and battered, who is obsessed with Jason because he killed his sister. And in who
was also one of the victims in part 2, I believe.
Part 2 or part 3, but whichever it is, it's only a short time ago. In other words, this, but because we're in the logic of campfire tales, it's infinitely long ago. It's a long time ago. There's sort of it doesn't really matter that the film in actual time took place, in theory, like 6 months ago. For that character to work, it may as well have been 20 or so years ago. Except, of course, that he's a relatively young, hunky guy who is hunting Jason.
It should really be called Saturday the 14th or Sunday the 15th.
Oh God,
Tuesday the 17th.
Although I did just do a mental body count of tally of all the people, and it's actually right down the middle. Jason is like an equal opportunity killer.
Yeah, he'll kill.
He's like the shark from Jaws. He will kill. There's only been a few, because they weren't. Jason is an accidental horror icon. Anytime we've done a Jason movie, I've said this. He wasn't like Freddy or Pinhead or even going back older like Dracula, where there was a lot of thought. He was created piecemeal over the course of these movies. And in the later movies, there were rules that were established. Jason will not kill dogs, and he will not kill small children. But you watch this movie, and of course he will kill a dog, and of course he'll try to kill a small child because those rules weren't established yet.
Right.
So he
didn't actually go after Corey. He kind of starts to lunge at him, but he's like, what?
I don't know.
We don't know what he would have done
safe.
if he actually gotten a hold of Corey. That is true.
Yeah, we don't
know. He held him in his arms and cradled him and rubbed his bald head.
One thing I wanted to point out also is that when you talk to people every day and say slasher films or whatever, like I say, hey, I do a horror movie podcast, and they'll say, oh, I don't like horror movies. And when you dig in, and what they don't mean The Tomb of Ligeia, they mean slasher films.
Yeah, they mean this movie.
They mean this is what they mean. And one idea that they've gotten ever since Carol Clover's book is that there's a deliberate thing where people are punished for having sex, or they're punished for doing things that's, I don't know, conservative Christians don't
And
like.
advice.
And I think that that's a misreading. I think it's funny. I think it's clever. It's a fun thing to say at a party, but I don't think it's true. This guy will just kill anybody. I think the characters are having sex and drinking and getting stoned because we like to watch characters, have sex
fun,
and
yeah.
drink and
Well,
get
the
stoned.
people who made these movies have always stated that they never had a right-wing agenda with these
Right.
movies. They were showing teenagers doing what teenagers do because that's when you'd be distracted and you wouldn't necessarily notice that there was a monster running around the woods
Sure.
picking off your friends.
And that's as good an explanation as you're gonna get, honestly. That it's, we want nudity. Here's nudity. We want whatever. We want kids acting up. Here they are. Let's actually start talking about the plot. I find it fascinating that in this film, we have a bunch of teenagers coming to a house, but we've also got a family that is actually living at Crystal Lake, and it is made up of a hot mom, a hot teen sister, and Corey Feldman. And first of all, who the heck lives? I guess it must be a really great house because they're living.
Well, imagine now property values are probably pretty low next to Camp Crystal Lake.
I guess,
it's got a death curse.
Yeah, that's the best line in the first one. Is it's got a death curse. That's Camp Blood. The Corey Feldman is a, I don't know, poorly defined video game mask making genius. His mom goes, "Hey, why don't you play that up in your room?" And he says, "What is it?" He says, "I need a bypass patch cord to play his video games." Up in his room, and I'm pretty sure that's a made-up phrase. And she goes, "Well, maybe you can get one in town." Which, having been a lot of places where there's a place to go called In Town, you're not getting a bypass patch cord in 1983 in there. You might get bait. That's about all you're going to be able to get. Bait and Snickers bars. So anyway, we meet these kids.
Well, you say where is In Town? Camp Crystal, like. That town that you're thinking would be so small would be like the city of Trenton, or like it's, you're in New Jersey. It feels like, suddenly you're in, the forest, and then suddenly you're on the turnpike, and there's.
Well, that's a really good point. No, that's a really, really solid point. Yes, it's got to have a Radio Shack if he wants any kind of equipment to mess with those.
The shack's where it's at.
Yes, because in 1983, that's it. Just Radio Shack, maybe a Curtis Mathis, and yes.
They had the Wiz back then too.
Yes.
By the way, as geeky as it's gonna sound, what he probably wants is an RF switch. It's not called a bypass patch cable. That's what
Give the kid a break.
But well, no. If you're really, but here's the thing: give the writers that would be give the writers a break, who obviously didn't check on what you need for a video game. But anyway, the kid would know if you needed that, because I guess 84 would be Atari, maybe ColecoVision, right?
Either one of those, honestly. The Atari 2600. If these guys are saving money, they'd get the Sears. I'm not making this up. Sears had a licensed 2600 clone that was called whatever it was called, but it was basically just an Atari 2600.
Yeah. They have their own Sears cartridges.
Yes, but they also had the Atari. It would play Atari cartridges.
Oh,
and
of course.
And there were these porting companies that were doing all these other third party games that worked for the 2600. Nobody cares.
Yeah. Anyway, but I had forgot. I guess I'm so used to people just putting in random dumb stuff like that, like technology, that I had forgotten about that. But anyway, I know exactly what he needs if he needs what he needs, but that's beside the point.
He needs an RF.
But have his window down for the car.
What?
Yeah, he was accurate in his car talk. So
he was accurate in the car. Oh, well, that's good. when the kids are on the way, when we first meet this family, the teenagers are driving out to this house that they're renting for, again, and it's unclear what period of time, but it doesn't matter. They're making their way down a road and getting lost. They do pass by this hitchhiker girl. One thing that I thought was really interesting is the girl is an overweight Canadian hippie who has a peace and love sign, and they shout like some like fat epithet at her, which is like it was so strange. It was just like
I thought
thrown
he
in
was
there.
like hitting on her or something. Like he'd
He
rather see you
goes, "Hey
naked or
baby, do you have a
something.
sister?" And then some like I don't know. It was weird. It was like it was pretty strangely hostile to a random Canadian. And then and then she gets
How do you
killed by
know she's
Jason anyway.
Canadian?
Because her sign says Canada or love.
Maybe she's headed for Canada.
Canadian love. What?
Maybe she's just
How
headed for
did you
Canada.
know though? Seriously, how'd you know?
It's funny. I've just heard this.
Yeah, like a
I,
maple leaf, like.
I
Well, I mean, she's at least going to Canada, but
Why?
I suppose she could be an American that wants to
Why
go
do
to
you
Canada.
think? Why do you think she's going to Canada? Was it say Canada or
Because her
bus?
sign says Canada or love. Like that
Oh.
is what her sign says.
Yeah.
But as you point out, she might just be going to Canada. Uh, anyway,
She's dodging the draft a decade or two too late.
I mean,
Yeah, there's that draft for women.
so who knows? It's a pretty. If you're looking for misogyny, her death really does nail it because this girl's doing nothing. She's just in the way. I should mention, there's, they do roll by Pamela Voorhees' grave. Pamela has been buried and given a tombstone right by the little road.
Presumably without her head.
Yes.
Her son still has that.
It's so absurd. And again, this is the kind of thing that I love. Yes, her tombstone is right there by the road so that the girls can go, ooh, creepy. There's no other graves around. It's just hers. It's been sit there like something out of a haunted house, and so that's cool. They're and then they find their way to the house. The other thing that I wanted to mention about this early scene where we're meeting these teenagers, the sound effects that is used, and we skipped over the whole scene where Jason, to get back to Crystal Lake, had to slaughter a couple of doctors inside of a hospital.
I mean, when you come back from the dead, it stands to reason that if that's like your gimmick, eventually you're going to end up in a morgue.
Yes. Yeah.
Although in fairness, this is the first real full-on Jason comes back from the dead in this whole series.
Really
honestly, this is like what was the part setting this up this way, with the nurse basically getting sexually harassed into finally being like, okay, let's make out, and then Jason like having a weird Copperfield moment while they're getting it on. That whole scene bothered me, especially. I think it's really hard right now to watch things like that during the Me Too movement. I was just thinking, I was like, man, like she's being sexually harassed so hard. Like this guy's basically watching, inappropriate stuff, like jerking it to
watching aerobics.
Yeah, and it's just the whole thing just was like skeezy to me. I was like, oh man, that's so.
It is a skeevy hospital. The doctor.
I do love the whole business though of them wheeling Jason in and him. Jason's obviously he's dead at this point, and then when they actually put him into the refrigerated case, you see a little puff of air, of breath coming out of his mouth. And the director said that he held off on giving any sign that Jason is going to come back to life as long as he could, because he wanted to make the audience complicit in bringing Jason back to life. And that's why he was like, I was just going to give them a little tease.
Yeah.
And I do love the pacing of this scene because it's going to happen. You just don't know exactly when. And as skeezy as the morgue attendant is, like I think this is one of my favorite resurrection scenes in this series.
I mean, to me, he just sort of appears, but I want to go back to the whole sexual harassment thing, because I'm totally with you. This is a skeevy doctor. He will not keep his hands off this nurse. Now, oddly enough, they seem to have some kind of a relationship where this happens all the time, because when she comes back, uh, and starts making out, first of all, the making out sounds in this movie are the grossest, like, kissing sound effects I've ever heard. The sound effects for kissing in this movie sound like somebody is like sucking syrup off a garage floor with a shop vac. It is this sort of and it's like, Jesus, nobody. It's horrible. Stop that. That's why they deserve to be killed. It's awful. But
God.
but she seems to be kind of happy to be making out with him. She's fine with it. She doesn't like the sexual harass. That's what's weird. She changes her tune.
It's weird because it's like she changes, like it's like she had been given different direction. And
Yes.
that's what it was like. It's like she's all pissed off. She's just like, God, Roger, or whatever his name is.
Yes.
And so angry, like the whole time. She's grossed out by him. She's just like, oh, get off. And then it's just like, all right. Like, fine.
Yeah. It's like 5 minutes later, she comes back in, and now she's all into it. It's as though she's a twin who doesn't know that she's supposed to be grossed out by this guy, which would be funny. So yeah, Jason offs the doctor, and then hunts down the nurse and finds her wherever the hell she is, and like, really, man, that's a vicious killing. That's really pretty gross. Ugh. I mean, he knifes her with a scalpel, and it's pretty. It is pretty disturbing. And these movies also are kind of a challenge to continue to turn off the brain, the part of the brain that sees these as real people, and instead sees them as just, like a couple of weeks ago, we were watching Carrie, and I was joking about how many teenagers Carrie kills. And that's because I'm not thinking of them as real people. I'm thinking of them as basically bowling pins. And that's sort of the only way that you can enjoy this, is if these are just basically just pins to be knocked over.
If they gave them a little bit more character, I feel like this one hit the tone exactly right in some respects, because they give them just enough character development to where they are actually a character, but they don't develop them enough to where you feel bad when Jason kills them. Because
I do wish that Ted had gotten killed a lot quicker. He's just the worst person. He's terrible.
Ted, which one is Ted? Is Ted the doctor, or is Ted?
No, Ted's the teddy bear.
Oh,
Ted's the wannabe player.
Oh, you're thinking teddy bear.
He's the one who gets stoned watching the 1930s stag movies or whatever. Yeah, they're not even the 30s. They're like silent stag movies from the silent era. Good grief. Yes. Okay, good point.
Awful.
He is awful. Like the so-called humor.
He would hang out. You wanna think that the doctor guy, the mortician, is his cousin. Like, they would hang out and trade various how to get chicks tricks.
Ugh.
All of them would also be terrible, but they would definitely hang out.
I love when the doctor sits down and pops open what looks like a warm beer, and he's watching his aerobics video, and he's like, "Thanks for waiting, girls." And I'm like, he himself thinks he's extraordinarily clever. Yes. So
again, this is why they would hang out. They're kind of the same guy.
So the Ted character you're talking about is the best friend, hanger out buddy, whatever, with Crispin Glover. And so those are two of the teenagers. Now, Crispin Glover, this is the most normal you will ever see Crispin Glover. And that's not saying.
Except when he dances.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I have a good Crispin Glover story.
Yeah, tell us.
It's that Drew could have lost his chance to be my beau.
True.
Actually, during my first South by Southwest where I had met Drew, um, we were supposed to go see the New York Dolls together. I had gotten tickets because of my record label, and was like a VIP guest. And who was there? And in his very dapper Colonel Fried Chicken or not Colonel, Kentucky Fried Chicken Colonel suit, all white, shaved head, no eyebrows, but Mr. Crispin Glover, and he proceeded to very politely, I have to say, hit on me.
Wow.
And I declined because I thought Drew was coming.
Aw.
And he never showed up. He slept through my date. I watched the New York Dolls without Drew, with Crispin Glover looking at me longingly.
Wow.
At least, dead fuck never came up.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
The term.
Well, if Jamie had referenced this movie, she probably would be Mrs. Crispin Glover right now. He would be like, so you're a fan.
Why? Actually, I don't think that guy's name was he goes by Ted. For some reason I thought it was, but now I can't remember his name.
I don't remember.
Drew?
Crispin...
Now that he said Ted, I'm stuck on Ted.
He's got the teddy bear. That's the whole thing. He's like, you want to kiss a teddy? Like,
Maybe that's why I keep
coming
back to that. I'm not sure.
One of those Doublemint twins.
Yeah, Ted is the one who's watching the Stag films and has a teddy bear and
he's really high in that scene, by the way.
Yes.
The actor thought it was a good idea to.
What? Really?
The actor thought it was a good idea to really get a real joint, and he was trying to do a bit of method acting and really get high, and apparently it was a disaster because he got really paranoid and knew that there was going to be.
I wonder why.
I don't know, but he got really paranoid because he knew someone was going to jump out and pretend kill him. But the funny thing is when Jamie and I actually did not know that until this weekend when I watched the Crystal Lake Memories film and they talk about it. But I actually made a crack when we were watching the movie because I was like, I've been around tons of people who are stoned in my life and they never act that goofy, and apparently yes they do. So shows what my naive ass actually knows. But he was really stoned during that scene.
Yeah, he kept coughing. You can hear it. Like he's like.
But when the teenagers are riding in, you meet Ted and Crispin Glover's character, and he's giving Crispin Glover all this advice because Crispin Glover has just broken up with his girlfriend. Now, here's what's funny. Crispin Glover has lines just like any other actor. Anybody could have played this part. But Crispin Glover himself is so strange that he gives a weird line reading to everything that he does. And I had seen him actually once before this film, which was High School USA, which was a big popular TV movie that featured a whole stars from all these different shows got together and made this high school comedy called High School USA. Crispin Glover was in that, playing an extraordinarily strange young man. He has just always chosen an odd path in his acting.
I don't think he's that strange in this. I mean, except for his dancing. I feel like everything else.
His voice is odd. You don't find Crispin Glover's voice to be strange, and like it's again, this is as normal as Crispin Glover will ever be. But
everybody who worked on this movie said he was weird. Like they didn't mean it in a derogatory. They said he was eccentric.
Yep.
But apparently, he did a number of odd things, including actually losing a remote control submarine in the lake, and he actually would refuse to go on set until he retrieved his submarine. The dance moves that he is that we're referencing, and anybody who's seen this movie knows exactly what we're talking about. Apparently, the reason why those seem so weird is that he's actually dancing to the song Back in Black, but they couldn't get the rights to that song, so they subbed out another one. I don't know if I quite buy.
I don't think that would make it better.
I don't think so either. I think it'd still be weird. But apparently Crispin Glover did say on the set that those were the hip dance moves in the clubs in L.A.
Okay.
So,
I
bet they were. I doubt that. Far be it from me to say what was or wasn't going on, but I don't imagine those particular moves were hip anywhere.
Yeah.
No.
I think those are the exact moves that I was doing at the time. Like those are my dance moves, my signature dance moves. Actually, it's exactly what Crispin Glover was doing. Granted, I was 1 year old at the time. This movie was filmed.
It makes sense. I guess
wasn't really doing much.
I can believe though.
The fist kicking and whatnot.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Yeah.
No, it's okay.
I can believe though with the lurching and everything that it somehow would go with the way Back in Black starts. I kind of get that, but I don't know. By the way, his dad is Bruce Glover, who was also a very odd actor and played, a number of strange and often sort of disturbing parts, just sort of slipped into movies. He played an assassin in Diamonds Are Forever. So he comes by this honestly. So anyway, we meet all these characters. There's a bunch of
Danny Glover. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I said his mother is Danny Glover. That's why he's really so weird. It's a weird upbringing.
The girls are all. It's hard to tell. I hate to say this. It's hard to tell the girls apart. You have a pair of twins, first of all. Then you have another nice brunette and another nice brunette. And then you have the blonde from the home, and it is truly difficult to. So I'm not even going to bother walking through what happens to each of them. I just want to point out a couple of their untimely deaths.
Wait, there are two brunettes? I'm missing a brunette here besides the twins.
There's the okay. Let me try and think my way through
I know
it.
there's the girl that gets murdered in the lake. She's, like in the boat. And she's the one that, almost got hypothermia because they were shooting so late. And
yeah, so let's talk about that.
50 degrees.
So the girl who gets killed in the raft, that's Tina, and I guess she's one of the twins, and she.
No, she's not one of the twins.
No.
She's not one of
the twins. No, she was jealous of the twin because the twin was hitting on Paul.
Right, she's her boyfriend.
Who seems like a super jerk until he finally
Sam.
like, well.
Sam, I'm sorry. Her name's Sam. I apologize. Yes, I will. I'll do penance for screwing all that up. Anyway, the girl Sam, she goes swimming. She goes out to lay on a raft, and honestly, truly, in July that probably would be great. But this is, this is like December, and apparently
it's November most likely because they started filming around Halloween.
Okay. All right. And whenever it is, I mean, they're filming all the way into the beginning of the year, but it's cold is the point. Just like Jamie said. And this girl, it's deeply, deeply uncomfortable for this actress.
Well, it's actually more uncomfortable than you think because the way they did this gag is the body you're seeing in the raft is only her body from the arms up.
The shoulders.
I see.
Her actual body is under the raft, and she's in a kind of wetsuit, but it didn't really give her much insulation from the cold, apparently. And they're shooting in the middle of the night. And the Ted White, the guy who played Jason, who was the oldest guy ever to play Jason, by the way. He was an older stuntman and actually doubled for John Wayne a lot. But he got into an argument with Joseph Zito, the director, because after a while she was starting to get very, very cold, and he had to actually threaten to walk from the movie, and and apparently he's out there and he apparently wore full Jason makeup even when they weren't filming his whole you were just seeing his hands or whatever. So you had Jason Voorhees of all people defending this young woman's honor because he didn't want to keep reshooting this scene. Now, the director denies it and actually says it was Ted White, the actor who played Jason, was actually the one that was complaining about being cold, and that the girl was like gung-ho about it. But the actress always backs Ted White when you ever hear this story retold. She's like, no, I was freezing, and I was very, very grateful. Although she never calls him Ted White, she always calls him Jason.
Really?
She was very, very grateful that Jason defended her honor. So there you go, Jason Voorhees, defender of the fairer sex.
This is an amazing. How do they do this effect, by the way? What is
her body is not her body.
I get that. But I mean, what is it made of? Is this latex? Is it?
It is a foam latex, basically mannequin with fake blood inside of it, and there is a particular place where you can stick a fake knife through. It'll cause the blood to pump out.
Yeah.
So you're not really actually seeing much of this woman, and the fact that it's shot at night and everything. It's to me the hardest death to watch in the movie, but I also think it's the coolest special effect.
It's an amazing effect.
This is one of the things, like, Tom Savini really is, when it comes to this kind of thing, is the absolute best when it comes to these kind of gore effects. Like, this effect to me is one of the coolest things. And I remember the first time I saw it when I was a little kid, that was one of the things that made me really want to start to understand more about how makeup effects work. Because obviously, even as a little kid, I knew that no one was actually killed. I knew this was a movie. I never had like some children will watch a movie and they'll think, oh, this is like watching a little universe. I never had that. So this was one of the things that actually made me start going and looking at monster magazines and reading about makeup effects, was this effect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if it works. Like, I think it's still pretty cool, but I think more memorable is, was it 3, the hammock one?
Mm-hmm.
That's the one
I don't
that
remember.
sticks to me way more than this. But
what happens in the hammock?
The guy's in the hammock and Jason comes up from underneath. It's a similar gag, but just totally.
It's funny. This is one of Savini's favorite tricks: is a blade coming out of flesh instead of going in.
The similar than the arrow through Kevin Bacon's neck.
I was going to say,
original.
The arrow
and they
through
do
Kevin
something
Bacon.
very similar in Mark with a stick.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's a good trick. And it's very memorable, I think, because that's just something always that skin isn't supposed to do that. So it's just always shocking to see something like that. Savini is such a strange cat. I mean, he says himself that so much of what he does is a means of recreating, learning from, and exercising his own disturbing experiences in Vietnam as a photographer. And he clearly has a great respect for how the stuff that we are made of works and doesn't work. These are good effects.
Well, also the reason why Corey Feldman's character, this character who goes on to basically be Jason's nemesis,
yes,
through the next few sequels, is named Tom. He's named after Tom Savini.
No
and
kidding.
That's the reason why they made the kid a makeup artist, and a kid that could make masks. And, which I always, the closest thing that Jason has to a Van Helsing or a Dr. Loomis, and he starts out as a little boy, but I do think that's kind of apropos because Jason starts out as a little boy. So
and Jamie already hinted at what's going to happen at the end, but yeah, we should talk about. Tony, did I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
No. I do wish that Rob, the Jason hunter, had a little bit more Jason hunting.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah. Tell us about Rob.
It's supposed to be a pass the torch kind of thing once you see what happens with Tommy. But I do kind of wish, I think, because Rob shows up and he has an alibi story. Oh no, I'm hunting bears. But once we discover, oh yeah, he's really hunting Jason, and he's responsible for passing on the clips that Tommy sees and uses against Jason. But Jason does a number on all his equipment, breaks his guns and stuff, and then he does allow a little bit of time for the sister to escape. But I wish we had seen a little bit more.
He's yelling,
Rob.
"He's killing me!"
Oh,
That was
yeah,
terrible
exactly.
and funny at the same time, Drew.
I found
You know
that.
what's funny?
very-
About,
No,
you know what's
exactly.
funny about that? The fact that he's yelling, "He's killing me," is based off of something that actually happened.
What? Okay, tell me more.
The screenwriter got that from a news story. Apparently, someone was killed in the courtyard of a apartment complex and was being stabbed by
sure.
someone, and as they were being stabbed, was yelling, "He's killing me."
You're talking about Kitty
he's
Genovese.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which you would think somebody would come out and help them, but
No, but that's been illustrated. That was in New York, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
yeah.
Yeah, because that was for years and years and years. That was used as that's the stuff that happens in New York. Why would you ever want in rural areas? That was the thing. In a city, people yell, "He's killing me," and no one comes. That's how the city is.
Yeah.
And it was used. That's mainly what it was used. And obviously, someone should have come to a rescue. But that was the cautionary tale of the city for
And it's more
anywhere not the
complicated
city
for what
for
it's
years
worth.
and years and years.
There's the legend. Tony's got it right. There's the legend of Kitty Genovese, which is exactly what everybody internalized. There's also a reality which is a little more complicated. A lot of people, in fact, did call the police. I don't think anybody actually went down. But there's an article in that. Not an article. There's an episode of On the Media on Kitty Genovese just from the last year or so. But that's fascinating. I had no idea it was related to that. I will tell you that was super disturbing.
Well,
I don't want
Jamie's
to hear some.
absolutely right that it's absurd in the movie. It's
And now I feel
extremely
bad.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
you shouldn't because it's extremely. In the context of the film, it's extremely campy.
It is. It is, but I'm not knocking the. I think you can. I actually am all for stuff that is both very funny and also very disturbing. To me, that is the pinnacle of horror when you have something that
Well,
yeah.
I think that's kind of Friday the 13th in a nutshell. I think these movies, and that's, going back to your initial question, I think that is one of the reasons why these movies are punk rock. They're the same three chords played very fast over and over and over again. But these movies had their tongue in their cheek long before, Scream or any of these other movies. I feel like Friday the 13th has always had some fun with itself.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I mean, but Scream is the retelling of this.
Yes.
It's the punk rock on a compilation of quote unquote punk rock.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Punk.
Like that
yeah,
80s collection of New Wave that was labeled punk. But and as we talked about, my problem with Scream is that Scream imagined that these movies followed rules a lot more than they ever actually do. I mean, that's and that's not really a problem with Scream. I'm just saying that Scream imagines that these films are more formulaic than they are. This is
I don't think they're formulaic. I think they are folkloric, and that has always been my argument for Friday the 13th against its critics.
Yeah, I think the problem with what you're talking about, Jason, is what happens when pop culture is digested.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes back to what we've talked about, where if you really truly want to do something interesting, take a look at what the directors or writers or whoever you idolize and see what they idolize. And if you can, see what those people idolize, because that's where you really get kind of a broader, deeper understanding. That is not to say that what Scream is reacting to is what ends up with these movies, because even Freddy eventually becomes this jokester that kind of has there's a rhythm to the films. But because there's so many copycat films where people go, oh, we want to make what teenagers like. Here's the teenagers have sex, and here's the things that make it, right?
Yeah.
It's basically like a spreadsheet of I heard the kids like this.
Yeah.
And those are a lot. There were a lot of knockoffs, and some of them are better than some of the movies that they came from, and others are way, way worse and pretty terrible. But what the rules part is a reaction, I believe, to obviously these movies are kind of making up as they go along. I mean, Jason doesn't really get a hockey mask until the third one.
That's right.
So the iconic Jason that we know of doesn't start out that way. And the
I would argue
Freddy
this is
doesn't
the first
really
movie that has the iconic, like, fully realized Jason character. Although even there,
I think so.
he runs a lot more in this movie than I think most people would expect.
How funny is it that you finally get the iconic Jason on the one called The Final Chapter?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the rules part happens when you see these movies in the aggregate after you've seen a million knockoffs. Like, there wouldn't be no Scream if there weren't dozens, if not hundreds, of these movies.
That's true.
To kind of react to and kind of get a macro level. That's where the tropes come from. But the tropes usually come from not the first thing, but the knockoffs that people go, man, that was popular. Let's just go do these. Happens in sci-fi. Happens all over the place, right?
The funny thing about that, Tony, is the guy that directed this movie, Joseph Zito, got this movie. He got this job because he had directed a successful Friday the 13th knockoff called The Prowler.
Did he really?
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's pop eating itself right there.
And the reason why this was the final chapter, like, Paramount themselves, like, there's this idea that Paramount was embarrassed by these movies, and that's why they kept trying to, make the final Friday the 13th movie. The only person that had really become embarrassed by these movies was Frank Mancuso Jr., who was the sort of producer, money man behind the original Friday the 13th movies. Paramount is, as much as people like to imagine that they were embarrassed, he's like, the Paramount executives were actually happy with these movies because they were low budget, and they always kind of helped their end of the year bonuses because they always turned a profit.
I like that idea anyway, though. Like, nobody at the top of a studio hates money.
Right.
We love to think that it's all art, but come on, that is not the case. Like, in the same way that the reality of going to see a show is, if a band, no matter how terrible, constantly has the bar hopping and makes ass tons of money for the bar, that band is going to get more people like asking them to come back than a band who's maybe artful and doesn't bring in the draw. Like, and that's the bottom line. That's not to say that's bad. That's just how it works. So the idea of, like, people being, man, I just hate making money, I hate that these things make money, is the dumbest. Like, that's just not how that works, ever.
Yeah.
Well, the reason, there's a couple of reasons why they called this the final chapter. One, they did want to possibly tie this off with a bow and everything in case that they weren't going to make anyone, because actually Paramount was worried, believe it or not, that the horror fad of the 80s was starting to wane. Little did they know that a little movie called Nightmare on Elm Street was going to come out shortly after this, and just keep that horror gravy train a-rolling. But the other reason why this movie was called The Final Chapter is that the executives just thought it was a good gimmick. Like, it's the last Friday the 13th movie, which it obviously was a good gimmick because they did it again, several movies later with Jason Goes to Hell.
Yes.
like
the Final Friday.
The Final Friday. But so, like, it is kind of funny, though, that people like to imagine that there were people that at the top that were embarrassed of making these movies, because the bottom line is, you're absolutely right, Tony. As long as these movies made money, they were gonna keep making, and of course, make them they did, because how many Friday the 13th movies have they actually made, and there's still talk of making more, and for what it's worth, I hope they continue to.
This is also a good-looking movie, I have to say. I mean, because if you think of, like, other long-running series like Planet of the Apes and so forth, one of the things that the producers in the documentary I saw about that were talking about was that once you get to, like, number 3 or number 4, the way the studio tended to do it is that they would just kind of spend out the brand. So you do one more and you spend like a fraction less than you did before, and you do another and you spend less still, because you're getting less return. There's no notion that you're going to, like, beef it up and win back more people. It's more like, let's just keep spinning this out until we're down to so few people that we think are going to come that we're just not going to do the next one. And that was traditionally how you basically burned out a series. And this didn't do that at all. This did very well. And they actually put money into it. Like some of this stuff, like the thing where Jason grabs the girl and yanks her out of a window, and you see her
Oh,
in
yeah.
slow motion flying down the side of the house. That's great. I mean, a lot of these gags are, they take time, they're expensive. It's there's the I think as Jamie was saying earlier, it's hard to remember just how much work comes into making something look this professional. Even if Roger Ebert doesn't respect it as art, it's still, it's some real work going on here.
Well, this
Uh,
is an extremely atmospheric entry too. Like I
yeah.
said, it's like I love all the rain and
Yes.
everything. Like I really do get like a even though there's these two houses next to each other where all the action takes place, it really does feel once the rain starts coming down in the last act like they are really cut off, and
Yeah.
I just always found that very creepy.
Yes. Yeah. Um, as we mentioned, the mom gets killed more or less off screen, and we never know exactly what happened to her. But the film wraps up because the hunter of Jason buys it. We're left with two final girls instead of one. We have a final girl and her brother. And Jamie, would you like to explain to us what the hell Corey Feldman thinks he's doing to come up with his trick? He comes up with a
Well,
trick, but
he
because
sees after reading that one article. He
Mhm.
reads one article about Jason, and like in this article, and they don't even have a picture of Jason. It's like a drawing, which you're
Yes,
like, man,
an
they
artist's
never know.
rendition, if you will. Yes,
Yeah. And and he looks like a little, I don't know, it's
it's the
mostly
Gollum-like
shadow.
Jason that we saw. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And but no, it's just that he takes the time as his poor sister's, just watching everybody. Like she watches the bear hunter, the faux bear hunter, bite it, and she's running around from house to house. She's getting thrown around. She gets, jumps out of a window instead of dealing with Jason, and she has to deal with, like, she's like, run, all I've told you to do is just run, damn it. And
Yeah.
he just is like, no, okay. And then he's like, wait, I have an idea. And because he makes masks, I guess maybe he's also into doing makeup, because he did have some nice shadowing effect
Uh-huh.
on his eyes, to make him look a little sickly. But he, like, shaves his head in the 5 minutes that she's running between houses trying to lure Jason away from him, and basically kind of tricks Jason into acting like he's young Jason,
Yeah.
or and Jason just is like, what, like, this kid's
Well,
messed
you're
up.
always saying that Jason might be able to be rationalized with.
Yes.
No one ever really does try to outright talk to him. And the thing I've noticed is when you watch these movies over and over again, as I have, there's this bit in this movie where Tommy Jarvis makes himself look like the young Jason, and then there's the bit in part 2 where
Yes.
Jenny, the heroine of that movie, pretends to be Jason's mom, and he always stops dead in his track. He does that weird thing where he tilts his head, and
like dogs do
like
when
he's considering,
you talk to them.
yeah, like a big dog, and he's considering all these things in what dinosaur leveled intellect that he
Yes.
probably has. So for the longest time, I've always been like, oh, I don't think Jason could ever be reasoned with. He's just a killing machine. But this time around, watching this, I'm like, maybe you could get through to Jason if you use some sort of regression. I mean, Jason's not human in the strictest sense, so maybe not. Maybe he's just an evil thing that will always be cursed to do evil acts. But maybe if you did try some sort of weird, if you could get him to halt, you could do some sort of weird regression therapy. I don't know. Now I have like this like idea, like, why don't we get now that we're X amount of movies in, why don't we get Jason Goes to Therapy instead of Jason
I
Goes
think
to Hell?
that first of all, you know that where that would go. If they threw Jason in a home and some dumbass tried to interview him, that guy is going to wind up dead. I think Jason's evil. I do think, though, that he has become a sort of a folkloric sort of demon who has a trick about him, in the same way that, like, if you're going to send Mxyzptlk back to his dimension, you got to get Mxyzptlk to say his name backwards, right? Jason has a similar trick. The only thing you can do to slow him down is to confuse him with images of his own past. That's interesting. That's some stuff you can play with right there, but that's all it is. He is an evil beast. I mean, he's out to kill things, and we can feel sorry for him when he gets abused, like in the past, or by Freddy, who wants to manipulate him. But he's turned over to the dark side, and he's gonna stay there.
People like Jason because they identify with him as, I talk a lot about The Other anytime we do like a monster movie or anything like that, and Jason's very much cut from that kind of Frankensteinian cloth. He's sort of Frankenstein filtered back. He's Frankenstein and Norman Bates filtered through Michael Myers, I guess.
Yeah.
And he loves he's the outsider kid, and he loves his mom, and I think those are two things a lot of people who can relate to, especially being the outsider kid, because like if you're in the horror movies, I've always said there's like two types of people. There's two ways to watch a horror movie. You either identify with the monster or you identify with the victims, and I think if you're the kind of, usually horror fans identify with a monster because they're kind of on the outside of society to a degree.
Yes. No, absolutely. I know that we just keep going, not you and I, but I think we as an audience, we go back and forth on how we are to think of Jason. But it can't be denied that he is killing an awful lot of innocent people who don't deserve to be killed.
In real life, this sort of behavior should not be condoned. But here's the thing: in Jason's universe, and Jason is actually the only person that matters. Like, this whole universe spins around him. So, like, without him, this world would fold up, and the woods and campfire tales and everything would just fold in on itself. So really, these people only exist for him to kill.
Wow.
If you want to look at it in a way that purely makes it, that takes some of the bite out. If you want to look at it in the nihilistic way that Ebert looked into it, and that's how you get your kicks, that's fine. But I look at this as a ghost story, and I think these victims only exist because Jason's story is a cautionary tale of we should not go too deeply into the woods because there are monsters in the woods.
I think they're almost like Saturday Night Live skits where the continuity is meaningless. If you decide that a character didn't make any sense, you blink and the character never existed in the first place. I really don't think that prior. I think each one is an entire world in itself. And by the way, like I said, I think this is one of the finest ones. So anyway, yes, Tommy dresses up like little boy Jason. That confuses the heck out of Jason because it's a weird idea. It's like, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna dress up like he was when he was younger and walk out and go, "Hey, you remember me?" And Jason is confused, and then and they manage to defeat him together. But when
he lops him in the head with a machete, and actually Jason very gnarly, once he gets the machete in, Jason
Trish
falls
gets him first.
over, and
the sister whacks him first with the machete, but she doesn't do any damage. She just knocks off his mask. But go ahead,
knocks the mask off for the good reveal of how grotesque he is. And then Tommy goes at him with the machete, and Jason actually falls over once. And
he gets him with the hammer too.
He hits him with the hammer. and he slides down the machete. Now, the interesting thing about this is that there was a lot of talk on how they were going to actually kill Jason, and the screenwriter swears they knew, even though they were at this point, they were like, well, we know Jason can never truly die. We know that, there's this guy has something extra. He said that they never used the word zombie. However, they were like, well, how are we going to finally kill this guy? They're like, oh, well, we'll destroy his brain like a Night of the Living Dead, and that way everybody will know he's for sure dead. But he was like, but we never used the word zombie. They said that It wasn't until years later where that word was being ascribed to describe Jason, but they said that word was never used. They're like, well, how are we going to finally kill this way in a way that could possibly feel final?
Yeah, but it's a pretty disturbing image when he falls forward onto this machete and his head sort of splits in half
like a pumpkin.
Yes, it's remarkable. It's a remarkable effect. It's yet another bit of Tom Savini cleverness. But and that's sort of almost the end, and then Jason still twitching, and so then we have Tommy pick up the machete and off screen start just sort of chopping him into little bits. I don't know if that will be enough. I don't know what they do with Jason's body. I have no idea what happens to Jason's body here. That's not made clear. We do jump
in the new beginning. They state that he was cremated, but in Jason Lives, it is established that is a lie, that he was buried, and they said that he was cremated. His family put that out there, but
it's
again,
weird that his body.
I
mean, his body seems to reform back again. Like when he's in Jason in Friday the 13th Part 6, his face is all covered in maggots, and he just puts the mask on over that. But in other ones, he has more kind of a face again. So he just changes form, from movie to movie. Anyway, we're left with a hint that Tommy Jarvis is one screwed up little kid, because we see him come and hug his sister, and the doctors are kind of hinting that he's going to need some serious watching, and he does seem to be pretty disturbed, and he's still got his partially shaved head, where he's shaved it but left these long strands of hair in various places and so forth. So am I to understand, Drew, that the idea was that Tommy was going to be the new Jason, that was what was going to happen?
That was an idea that they were possibly exploring to leave it open for sequels. The idea that Jason was somehow this plague of evil that could transfer from person to person, and that would be a way of continuing. Which is funny, because when they do Jason Goes to Hell, that they actually make it very, very literal when they do the Jason Worm thing.
Yes.
Jason Goes to Hell. But this, it's more of like a spiritual thing, like a madness that passes from person to person. But they never really follow up with that. They kind of hint at it again in A New Beginning, but it really, I mean, what they found out through the process of doing A New Beginning is that, people like the Jason character, and they like it in the form that we've grown used to him being in. So, when Jason Lives came around, they did a more traditional sequel. And I kudos to them for trying new things, and kudos for them. Like, if this had been the last one, I guess that's kind of an ambiguous ending, but obviously it was not the last one, because they made many, many more of these.
Right. Okay, so that takes us to the end, and we should get our final thoughts on this movie, Friday the 13th, the final chapter. So, and Drew, we'll go in the same order. So it'll go Drew, Jamie, Tony, and then I'll go. So Drew, we've talked at length about Friday the 13th, the final chapter, but I'm dying to know how you would wrap this up, and for the listener, what your final thoughts are.
Well, first off, I would like to point out, because I said at the beginning I was going to offer up a bit of trivia at the end. Jason is killed with a machete in this movie. Jason is famous for using a machete. Jason does not actually kill anybody with a machete in this film, interestingly enough. So, take from that what you will. I enjoyed the hell out of this conversation. Thank you for indulging me this movie. I love the Friday the 13th movies. I in my fandom pyramid, it is arguably the top. I just adore these movies, and what a great nostalgia trip. I was glad that I was actually able to watch this on Friday the 13th, this last Friday. It was great to tie it into the 35th anniversary. I just think this is a fun movie, and these movies are like potato chips. When I watch one, I just want to go back and watch all of them. And I hope to our listeners that I am not annoying and shrill this week with my constant hammering of Friday the 13th tidbits into
I think it was great.
the podcast.
I think it was really great.
Well, this is one of the few subjects that I can talk at length about and talk I don't know what it says that I am a scholar of Friday the 13th movies, but it is one of the few subjects that I can talk about with a degree of expertise. So I'm always open to doing that, and I hope later on down the line we can indulge yet another Friday the 13th movie, because I just enjoyed the hell out of this conversation.
Awesome. Jamie, what about you?
Well, I'm not gonna say it's like my favorite thing ever. I watched it. Would I watch it again? Yeah, probably. Drew was like, "Yeah, let's watch this," and I was like, "All right, you got some ice cream?" It's probably not the first thing I would turn on. Slasher movies aren't usually my thing, but I know it has its good points, and if you like special effects and kind of just wondering how did they actually do that?
Yeah.
It's kind of a neat little thought. If you that's kind of how I had to watch a lot of this movie, is that I would actually pull myself away from it, because as much as we say we didn't get attached, I find all the banter that the characters have and just their weird little awkward, semi-sexual movements between each other, and that their experiences with each other, it makes them a little too real for me. So I kind of have to focus on the special effects in order to not feel just terrible for them the whole time. So, but yeah, that's kind of my thing with this movie. Like I said, it's but watch it for the Corey,
Wonderful. And yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and I think it's something we could continue debating over and over. Is what do we make of this art that kind of asks us to see people as real people, and also asks us to observe their death, and clearly not take it seriously. Tony, what are your thoughts? Friday the 13th final chapter.
I think like I said before, I still prefer part 3. I think is my favorite. This one has some really interesting kills, and it is definitely peak 80s, very 80s slasher movie. I think you'd be hard pressed if you were to go through tropes to not, the sex is there, there's a lot of it in this one. There's a lot of kills. There's a lot of varied kills, and it kind of just goes through all of that. The kind of twist at the end with Corey Feldman's character, I think that's pretty cool, and even better tying it back to Tom Savini. And it's like I said, it's not my favorite, but I think it's got a lot of cool stuff in it. And for a Friday the 13th movie, it's definitely one of the better ones. I have to admit that after this, there's bits that I remember from various ones where they try to do something different, but they really start to blend together for me, especially afterward. Even though there's some really good things in each one where you're like, oh, well, they're trying something new here. This is kind of cool. But yeah, I think I do think it's kind of cool being able to grab one of these on Friday the 13th and at the anniversary point of the movie. That's pretty cool, actually. And because this one is memorable in the way they potentially could have ended it, etc. I don't know if it's one I'll revisit a lot, but it was cool. It's also cool to do a Friday the 13th movie with Drew. So,
Well, thank you, Tony.
Yeah, I think that's always good. I think we each bring something to the table as far as our interest. So, it's nice when it's a movie like, oh man, let's just do this. This is all the stars align. That's really cool. So, I enjoyed it.
My final thought is just that if there's such a thing as a Friday the 13th movie in the world of forms that is perfect, it's everything that you want to be and nothing else. This is almost as close as I can imagine getting to that. This is a really solid Friday the 13th movie. I'm very happy that we got to discuss it, and and to delve into some of these topics. And Drew, I think you're a great sort of Virgil to this particular Inferno. So I'm really happy that we got a chance to talk about it. Let us do endorsements. Figure out what it is that we've been paying attention into or listening to or whatever. Drew, what do you got for us?
Well, two things that are called the same thing. I am going to recommend, first of all, the book, the big, amazing coffee table book, Crystal Lake Memories by Peter M. Brack, that came out, probably a decade ago now, which is an exhaustive history of the Friday the 13th franchise from the original movie on up. And the documentary film that is almost 7 hours long of the same name that is on Shudder right now, also called Crystal Lake Memories, and goes over a lot of the stuff that you heard me ramble on about tonight. If you are a fan of the Friday the 13th films or just a fan of 80s era horror in general, I think that both of these things would be excellent additions to your collection. And, certainly there are worse ways to pass the time if you have nearly 7 hours to kill, or if you want to watch it over a period of a few days. The Crystal Lake Memories documentary is excellent, and the book is beautiful, and I refer to it a lot, not just for this particular episode of this podcast, but sometimes I just like to pick it up and flip through it when I'm trying to think of ideas for stories and things like that. So both are called Crystal Lake Memories. One is a book, one is a documentary. The documentary is on Shudder right now. I recommend both highly.
That's wonderful. Okay, that's a good tip. I will definitely look for that. Jamie, what about you?
Well, I've just started watching that Comrade Detective on Amazon Prime. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's kind of a Romanian propaganda, like a communist propaganda film that was kind of lost in the
Oh, I've heard of this.
during the Cold War. Yeah, it's kind of like a Berlin Wall type show, but it's very strange because it's been overdubbed by Channing Tatum and Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Nick Offerman. So it's pretty funny actually, but it has like this whole buddy cop thing going on, and to hear the way they talk about Americans, and it's just pretty funny. So if you're looking for something, flash back out of the 80s, you need something to keep the 80s trend going after seeing this. Can dip into some Cold War love and up into Comrade Detective.
I'm really excited about that. I've heard that it's really brilliant, and it's such a strange premise. So
It is.
very cool.
It's pretty good so far, though.
Awesome. Tony, what about you?
Oh man, I haven't had a lot of time to do much. I think I've talked about them. I'm excited this week to see the band Haunt, which I have really enjoyed their music. They have an EP, and I'm super stoked to see them this week. Also, because I work with a really awesome 2D team, and they have been just flat out working super hard, making a show called Nomad of Nowhere. And you can catch that on YouTube. They premiered on our site, on the Rooster Teeth site, and then it gets put up on YouTube. It's been trending on YouTube each new episode, and they have been super killing it. So please, if you get a chance, reward these awesome people's great work by watching Nomad of Nowhere. I think it's really good, and it must be doing something, because it's they're all working really hard to make this really awesome thing, and people have picked up on it. And I always think that's great when a new 2D show premieres and people are enjoying it, because there's a lot of work in hand drawing a whole show and putting it out there.
Fantastic. And I have an endorsement that I'm working on, but I'm not done reading it, so I will come back with that next week. So that brings us to the end. If you are listening, the show, of course, the Castle of Horror podcast, come to our Facebook page, the Castle of Horror page. Let us know what you think. Let us know whether you agree or disagree. You can start debating with one another. We want to engage on there, and we totally will. If you're listening, leave reviews, especially on iTunes, because those filter out to everywhere else. It helps people find the show. We are so thankful that you guys are here listening. And, lately we've been just going through some of our favorite films, and it's been a real blast. I do not even know what we will be back with next, but I promise that I will let you guys know soon.
I thought it was The Lost Skeleton of Cadavra.
Well, I think it is. The question is it next weekend or is it the weekend after that? I think it's well, the thing is, all of us are going to be getting together next week for an event in Round Rock, Texas. So the question is, will we be recording while we're in Texas, or will we have to take the week off? I don't know. We haven't completely figured that out yet. But yes, it is going to be Larry Blameyer's Lost Skeleton of Cadavra, which I regard as just a piece of genius. So I can't wait to discuss that one. So thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic, Friday the 13th in your mind, but have a fantastic week, and we will see you all soon. Bye, guys.
Later.
You're all doomed.
We're all doomed. Bye.